Hey everyone, welcome to Founders 365 with me, Steven Haggerty. Today I'm joined by the co-founder of Lifted, Rachael Crook. How are you today, Rachael?
I'm great, thanks, Stephen. How are you? Thanks for doing this
I'm
morning.
Sunday morning. What better way to spend our time than talk about your business and figure out some stuff as well. So thank you for your time and
No
thank you for
worries.
being here. Let's start off by just giving everyone an overview of what Lifted does and the story behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was 24 and I was at uni doing a master's, and my mum, who was 56 at the time, was diagnosed with early onset dementia. And right from that first moment that she was diagnosed, our lives had changed completely, because obviously I was thinking about dementia 30 years earlier than you might expect to be. And I noticed that there was really no support for families at all. And then after about 3 years, we recognized we were going to have to bring someone in to help us. And we brought in a home care company. And while the people that looked after my mum were good and kind people, I felt really frustrated. And I felt frustrated about three things. The first was the lack of support that I described, the sense that your life had changed and you were suddenly on your own. The second thing I felt was the lack of transparency and not being able to keep in touch with care when it was happening. And the third thing I felt frustrated about was the way that the carers themselves were treated, that they were being underpaid and under-rewarded. And yet we know that the most important thing about the experience of care is who turns up to look after your loved one. Yeah. And so we put that experience together and we launched Lifted. And our ambition at Lifted really is to make sure that no one cares alone. And we're called Lifted because we want to lift lives. And our objective really is to work with families from that first moment of diagnosis through to the end of life. And the way that we do that is that we deliver care directly into people's homes using our platform to improve the quality of care and give families more transparency and carers better working conditions.
I mean, one of the best elevator pitches I think we've had on the show so far. So thank you for sharing.
No
also,
worries.
you're so obviously linked to this business and the reasons and the why. For you, once within those 3 years, 4 years of happening, at what point did you go, I'm the one that can solve this? I'm the one that can lead this journey to help solve this?
I mean, I think as it was a really interesting question. And when you put it like that, it makes me think the level of confidence that you have to make that claim. I think I went, I finished, so I was at Oxford doing my master's. I finished off at Oxford. I went to work in government. And I worked as a senior advisor in the Prime Minister's Implementation Unit, which is the bit of government that advises the Prime Minister on, are we on track to meet our manifesto commitments? And one of the things that I was asked to look at was, what does the contribution that challenges in social care make to failings in the NHS? So I'd already looked at it from an academic perspective, and it was very clear to me that there was a real gap in social care. And then I went and worked at McKinsey and learned commercial skills. And one of the things I did at McKinsey is I worked on the review of female entrepreneurship. And until that point, I was like, well, I don't think I can do this. I'm not smart enough. I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't done it. And then I started to meet these women who were amazing. And I was like, well, hang on a minute. I know all about this because I did it academically. I've actually had the problem. And now I'm a business consultant, so I know how to run a business within reason. I was like,
what is stopping you?
Yeah, exactly. It probably isn't really an excuse anymore. And then I was very lucky to meet some guys who ran a venture builder called 01, and they'd actually already started thinking about Lifted. And so they'd incorporated a company, but hadn't, and then started kind of thinking about the product. And I joined them right at that beginning of the journey. So I didn't do it all by myself, and I want to be very clear about that. And I think working together with them is what made me feel, well, hang on a minute, they know how to build businesses. I have this real understanding of the problem. Let's put it together.
For you, when you officially joined and co-founded Lifted, how was that change from working with those, working with McKinsey, working with the government, hugely responsible, extremely proud sort of job titles that we can say, and then you're thrown into the startup life, which is extremely different, even if you are sort of VC backed and have that support. How was the early days for you on a personal level, making that changes and figuring out what to do with Lifted?
I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because of course, from a CV perspective, you work for big institutions, you're proud of that. But ultimately, the thing that people see is the passion that you talk about your job with. That we all know people that have jobs, that they work in amazing institutions, but they don't talk about them with passion. And I mean, I'm very lucky. I was very passionate about government, and I was passionate about McKinsey. But the level of passion that I felt about Lifted was just on another level. And I think it's really important to understand, like, what are your superpowers? And one of the things that I'm really good at is when I'm really passionate about something, when I'm really committed to it, I can like work really hard at it and make it happen. And so for me, it just felt like being set free, to be honest, because suddenly I could attack all this energy that I had to something that I really cared about. And also I could very quickly see the results. And I'm sure every business owner can relate to that moment where you have your first customer and how exciting it is. And the moment at the beginning you're doing everything, right? So our first customer, we're not a B2B SaaS business. Our first customer is literally someone that you're letting them trust you to look after their loved ones. And our first customer actually was a lady who was pregnant and had been put on bed rest, which is not what we expected at all as the use case, because usually the use case is older people. So I had to go around to her house and conduct a needs assessment personally, and then get a carer on a plane from Poland to look after her because we didn't have any carers yet. And, like the sense in which you just have to kind of get up and go. Yeah. Yes, it's exhausting and scary, but there's literally nothing else like it in terms of, I really know I made a difference today, and it was worth going to work. Then the impact that you have on people's lives is really incredible. So, I think it's the most enormous privilege.
And is that what keeps you going? Is that what keeps you motivated? That difference that you're making, and it's such a clear difference as well?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is the sense of injustice. Like I genuinely feel like the care sector is one of the kind of the biggest under talked about problems. In the last 6 months, people have talked a lot more about the care sector, but the need for home care in this country is going to double in the next 15 years.
Wow.
The number of people living alone is going to go up by 55%. Meanwhile, the number of care home places is dropping per person, and obviously that was before this year, and now who wants to go to a care home? So there's this massive gap where people need this service, and it's also the most expensive thing you'll ever buy. So my mum's care was 4 times my parents' mortgage on average a month, and so it makes me really annoyed, to be honest, that the amount of innovation and deep tech we've put into some problems, and yet we haven't solved the most fundamental, which is how do people live good lives. So
why do you think that is? Big question, I know.
Yeah. And quite a political one. I think the sector has not been brilliant at advocating for itself. The price that the government pays for care is low, and so the ability to attract people with lots of kind of skills and experience has been limited. And so people are just too busy trying to do the difficult job of caring for people and advocating for themselves. I think that is changing. I think there's a massive, in general, societal undervalue of care. We pay carers next to nothing. The vast majority are paid the minimum wage. That's not the case at Lifted. So I do think there's a lack of paying attention to it. And also I think it's been a problem that's kind of been allowed to develop over time. And so now it seems very difficult to solve. But it's going to have to be one that we solve. And then sorry, interrupting.
Sorry, out of curiosity, in terms of the industry itself, how many people are in there that are like you, that are sort of young, feisty, have this very linked passion with what you want to do? Because from an outside perspective looking in, I can imagine it's a little bit, I'm going to use the word stale, in the sense where the people trying to make those changes, whereas you're coming in going, right, actually we need to do something. It's not about doing it in 10 years. It's about doing it now.
I think there's a growing number of people like me. And there's a couple of, we're not the first VC-backed care startup. We are the kind of first people to try and do it in a regulated model. So we're not a hands-off platform. We're not going to introduce people to a carer who's self-employed. It's not the number of care. We actually employ our carers. There is a regulated model, and we take responsibility for the whole care journey, which, from a commercial perspective means that the value we build with our customers is worth a lot of money. So it makes sense. But also from a social level, I think is the right thing to do. I think there's a growing number of people, but I and my co-founder, Sam, who I absolutely couldn't do this without, he comes from having run operations at Yopa, the online estate agency. So he brings that experience from a different sector. And a lot of the people that we've recruited, we've tried to take talent from other sectors and bring them into the care sector and then combine them with people in the care sector. And there is a real cultural clash. And it is challenging trying to run a company like that. And then when you add in a tech team, there's a whole other set of cultural norms that you're trying to smush together. But I think if you can remain focused on that mission, then that will take you a long part of the way. And so I think there's a growing vanguard of people that are kind of wanting to reform things. But I'd still say it's the minority.
Yeah. And I suppose it's one of those things where if you can be part of that integral change in these early stages, then you'll position yourself in a fantastic place, not just on a business level, but that personal satisfaction, that personal change, and the difference that you can see in terms of not just with your clients or customers. And it's about having that difference outside of your business, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, we're here to live lives. We live the lives of our carers, the families, and the people that we support, and our own team. And I definitely see that impact. But I mean, it is also a huge commercial opportunity. Like our revenue has grown 20% month on month this year. There are not many startups that have been able to do that given the crisis. And it did the same last year. And we've only got 5-star reviews, and we've raised £3 million in investment. So I think we found a problem that is both commercially valuable and socially important, and those two things together are kind of what makes us be able to get the resources to drive the change that we want.
Yeah, it's often the case where it's one or the other, especially with social sort of problems. It's very underfunded across the board, I think. For you, what's been one of the biggest challenges in terms of growing this business, even though you're doing ridiculously well in terms of that growing 20%? What have been some of those challenges to get to that stage?
Good question. I mean, you ask any founder what's on fire, something always. I mean, the other day it was funny.
What are you firefighting today?
Well, I mean, the other day I saw Sam, I said my co-founder, and we were having a meeting, and I saw him about 11 o'clock, and I was like, "What's on fire today?" And he was like, "Nothing." And I was like, "That's odd."
That means there's a big fire somewhere.
Well, exactly. And then I was like, the biggest fire we've ever had broke out. And that fire was basically a live-in carer walked out on the job and just left a vulnerable family member without.
Oh, wow.
And at that point, you have no option. We had to get our care manager in a car and drive her to Oxford, where our client was. And then she had to look after that person. And those are the moments that no one talks about. And maybe I shouldn't talk about them, but those are the moments no one talks about.
Talk about it, because that's like the real life side of things as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
That it's not all going to be perfect. It's not all going to be growth. It's not all going to be that shiny sort of Forbes news article that people often read. It's actually those firefighting situations which allows you guys to perform better as well, because it sounds like that's the first instance that has happened, but now I'm guessing from that you're going to learn.
We learn hugely, and also I'm really proud, like we retained the client, we earned their trust, and we proved to them that we could do it, and we got someone. We didn't leave them without care because we managed to keep the holdover there. So I think that those are challenging moments. When you have your dream and your vision in your hand, it's perfect, right? And then you release it into the world, and you have to trust other people to deliver it. And that's wonderful because they do way more than you could do on your own. But Lifted employs 50 people now, and I can't watch what they all do, and neither should I, right? The job of a leader is to empower people to do their work the best way they can. But it is hard to know what all the carers are doing and to feel the trust in them sometimes, not because you don't trust them, but just because it's human nature to want to be there all the time. And I think, I have not yet met a founder who's not a bit of a control freak, right? Because you have vision of what you want in your mind. So that on a personal level has been hard, but my co-founder is really good at he's a really brilliant manager of people. And so I learn a lot from him. The other thing that's been hard is just emotionally, I care about what we're doing so much. And my mum's health has continued to decline throughout Lifted. And trying to, when you care about something so much, you feel every time you don't live up to that standard. And then obviously trying to run a care company through COVID has been a whole other set of challenges. We've been trying to get PPE to 40 different houses individually. And at one point, we didn't know how to get enough masks, so Sam had to go down to a local hospital and exchange meatballs for their masks because they had a special supply for care homes, for a home care company, sorry. And we wanted to thank them. And so there've been very real challenges in that sense. But throughout it, as I said, we've continued to grow strongly, which obviously is the important thing, particularly as a VC-backed startup.
Is there anything specific in the last couple of months that has happened due to COVID that you've thought, actually, this is something we need to be adopting and bringing on moving forward no matter what?
That's really interesting. Obviously, when COVID hit, we had to move everything remotely. So like every business, we went completely remote, but we also had to start training carers remotely, which is challenging, and start assessing client needs remotely. So usually we'd go to meet them in person and speak to them about their needs. And I do think that we've proven that you can do that. And I wasn't necessarily sure we could. So that was really helpful. So I do think adopting that is important. And the other thing is it forced us to have a lot more closer cooperation with our staff because we were worried about them. Yeah. And I think we're now thinking through with our platform, our platform has 3 apps: an app for family members, an app for our carers, and an app for us. And it digitizes the operation. So if someone doesn't check into an appointment, it lets us know. And I think we're increasingly realizing we need to build more ways of motivating and incentivizing our carers into the platform. So that's important. And then the other thing I just add to that is, during COVID, more than 50% of adults looked after another adult. And yet we still see this huge lack of support for family carers. And so we're very excited that we're going to release a new version of our app in a while or so that everyone will be able to use, even if they don't have care from us, to give them the support that they're looking for. So I think that's really important as well.
How do you get in front of those carers that I would probably call them sort of carers that don't realise that they're carers almost, that don't realise that there's support out there, that don't realise that there's incredible companies like yours that can be there for them to make them, lifted?
It's really hard. That is, if you want kind of what's the marketing challenge, that's the biggest challenge, right? A lot of people compare us to childcare. There's a couple of really great childcare startups. But people know if they have children, and they know before they have children they're going to have children.
You would hope so, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. In the majority of cases, people don't often know that they're going to be looking after loved ones, and even when they do, the notion of being a carer isn't kind of clear to them. So it is hard. I would say there's a very relatively clear demographic. So we talk about stressed out Sue, and stressed out Sue is typically a woman, but not always a woman, but it does tend to skew women. Who is in her 40s to 60s, looking after her parents and usually her adult children, and is stressed out and under-supported. And that's a demographic that we tend to attract and that we predominantly try to speak to. And then trying to find ways to actually reach that person is important. Our experience so far has been that being able to communicate the shared experience that I've had of knowing what it feels like to look after someone have been really important. But yeah, the challenge and the learning that we as a company have to go on is how do we find these people before they know that they need care? Yeah,
I imagine that is for both the carer and for you guys, especially for the carer. I'm guessing it can also happen overnight. It's completely unexpected, unpredicted, and if you're there to support them, then that's fantastic. Let's talk about support for you then. Let's talk about support for you as a founder. You mentioned you've got a fantastic co-founder. What else have you made sure that you've got in your environment so that you can be focused on Lifted and you can give Lifted everything it needs?
What good question. I think it helps that a lot of my family and friends have kind of seen the journey with my mum. So they understand Lifted like intrinsically, and they're really, really supportive. So that's been really important. I've got a brilliant partner. He's really, really supportive, and I think he almost lives the ups and downs of Lifted more than I do. He hears them when I tell him, whereas I'm kind of seeing them. So that's been really important. I have a coach. I'm very lucky to work with a coach that's been supporting me, which is brilliant. And I do, I think a lot about my own mental health in my kind of spare time, particularly during lockdown, trying to protect it. And then I also think about, what are the things that energize me? So I'm happy to do this on a Sunday morning because talking about Lifted energizes me.
Great way to start the day then.
Exactly. And it really does. It really will set me up for the day. So I think trying to build into my schedule the things that really energize me and minimize the things that don't is important. And I think it's like psychologically trying to see it as a way of learning is important. I've got a few friends that are founders, but I don't have that many. And I particularly find it hard to meet other women, particularly VC-backed startups, because there's a certain set of expectations that come along with accepting that investment. And we're very lucky. We were invested in by MPhil Ventures, and they've been nothing but supportive since we started working with them. So they've been a huge support, actually, and so have the angels that have invested in us. But there are a certain set of expectations, which is right when you take other people's money. And so meeting other people with that experience, I think, is important. And I would like to do more of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with your business and your story, I think people are naturally going to be listening to you and they're naturally going to want to be around you, which is really nice for you to be there. And the more support you can get for you, the more better you can be for Lifted, which is only a plus. So let's now talk about the future. Let's talk about the future of Lifted, where you guys are going to go, and how you're going to do that as well. Because like you said, you've implemented change that you never thought you would implement in terms of the virtual side of things. Has that changed your goals or your future planning at all?
I think our objective has always been to be the premium companion for families looking after a loved one, and be the place to go for advice and guidance before they need care, support them with that care journey, provide an alternative to a care home right through until the end of life, and therefore see that relationship with the customer extending over kind of 2 or 3 years. And that is the case. And we think that has the potential to scale globally, even where we don't necessarily deliver care itself. We deliver guidance and advice for people, and we become that place where people go to, because we think there's a real missing voice for family carers out there. In terms of where we go to immediately, we're focusing on a whole bunch of tools that will help families feel the joy of care. Because at the moment, care seems to often take things away from them. It becomes this stressful, it's unreliable, and our platform is designed around putting that joy and that transparency back in. So we're doing that at the moment. We're also working on a whole set of tools to behaviourally nudge our carers to behave in certain ways, to incentivize them to do a great job and to make them feel rewarded and engaged. And we want to change that. And our ambition is to have 1 million people on our platform in the next few years. And then, to lift the lives of thousands of people through the care that we actually provide. So that hasn't changed. I think if anything, it's galvanized us that this becomes more important. And there are lots of sectors that sadly, are kind of decreasing in relevance through what's happening. But actually, care is a sector where there's a huge workforce shortage. There's a desperate need for more carers. There's a whole generation of people now who are having to rethink their employment prospects and attracting them into care and making a sector that is worthy of those people, and that those people want to come and be part of. I think it's a really important mission. And if we can do that, we will very fundamentally have changed people's lives.
Yeah, 100%. One thing I wanted to ask was, how have you had the feedback from the carers themselves? Because by the sounds of it, they've been working in a world where they haven't had the support that they need, and they haven't been with companies, or if they've been freelancing and things like that, they haven't had that support. And now you're giving it to them. That must be a huge change for them as well, in terms of how they look at how their role is in their work.
Yeah, I mean, it's been absolutely amazing, to be honest. Like we speak to them all the time. And we also we poll them and get high satisfaction rates. But they also just spontaneously send us really lovely feedback. And we're a regulated company, so we were inspected by the Care Quality Commission. And one carer said to the inspector that we had changed their perception of the sector, which is like a full goal, right? Like,
yeah, that's what you have on your wall.
Yeah, exactly. We literally had it on our wall before we gave up our office. And we won't always get it right. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say we do everything right all the time. Of course not. But I do think that learning to them and listening to them is a really important part of what we're doing. And I think it also means that you attract people who wouldn't necessarily go and work for normal care companies. So, we've had a fully qualified doctor come work for us. We've had a jazz musician come work for us who actually wrote a jazz piece about Lifted, which is pretty cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. If anyone wants to see it, it's called Dancing in Pajamas.
Great name.
Lady with dementia. So I do think the response from them has been really positive. And also, we want to learn from them as much as we can about what would make their jobs easier.
Definitely. One of my final questions, which is going to be quite a big one, I think, other than Lifted, what else do you think fundamentally needs to change in the care industry?
Oh, what a big question for Sunday
Big
morning.
question. I know. Sunday. Look, you wanted more questions.
Well, yeah.
Lifted,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, there needs to be a decision about how we pay for care. I mean, 80% of the care market is paid for by the government, and a lot. I mean, we will at the moment, the price the government pays to deliver care is not the price that we can afford to pay our carers decent wages on.
Yeah.
And that's the political decision. There's also a need to develop a whole set of and there's kind of this narrative that care is in crisis, and I'm. It's true that there's a crisis as a consequence of that, but the decision to pay a certain price isn't a crisis decision. It's a decision whether or not to pay a certain price for a service. And if you price the service lower than it costs to produce, then you can't deliver quality. It's basic economics. So that's an important decision that the government needs to make. I mean, I have sympathy with them. It's an impossible question. Like, how do you fund this hugely expensive service? And it's also a societal discussion. Like, should people have to unleash the value of their homes to pay for their care? I'm not kind of going to give a thought on that, but I do think it's an important discussion. The second thing is a market of products to pay for care. So at the moment, it's quite difficult to find insurance or products to help you pay for care, where other countries have insurance systems. So that's important. So those are the kind of big ticket items. But then I think there's a lot to do around, there's no kind of required qualification to be a carer before you start working. Oh. There's a whole bunch of companies that are able to operate without being regulated. So I think there's a whole set of provisions that need to change. But the way that carers are treated is important. And then the last thing I just say on that is is that there's a real gap in people see NHS doctors, and then they have care staff, and no one collects that data and fills that gap where data is being seen by carers but not fed back to the NHS.
Oh, wow.
And so one of the big ambitions of our platform is to do that. So we ask our carers to collect health data about the people that they look after. But there's a lot more to do, because it really doesn't make sense that, carers are seeing clients every single day and no one is using or valuing that data from a health perspective. So there's a huge opportunity there.
Hugely. I think that just speaks volumes in terms of what you guys want to achieve. And I think on your point in terms of the pay for carers, the fact that you are changing that means that you're putting that sort of domino effect in place, even though it may be a little bit slower than we hope or we want. But it's companies like yours that I love speaking about and talking to, because you're doing something that is fundamentally changing how people's futures are going to be at the end of the day. So kudos to you, and the Lifted team. I think you're doing a fantastic job. And I guess my final question is then, how can people find out more about Lifted?
So you can go to our website, which is www.liftedcare.com. You can sign up to our newsletter there as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. Those are probably the easiest ways to find out about us directly. Or you can download our app, which is Lifted Care, in the App Store. So those are the easiest ways to reach us. And we always want to hear from people who've got ideas. And we offer hourly care anywhere in London, and we offer living care anywhere across the country. So if you know people that need support with their loved ones, then please get in touch.
Perfect. Rachael, listen, thank you so much for your time. And like we said, on a Sunday morning, I hope you're going to spend the rest of the day doing something really fun. I have no doubt you will.
Thank you so much. Nice to speak to you. Take care.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening and watching the Spin Founders 365.
Thank you.